Hey and guys, our story here begins with the Dark Night. That's a bit more special than the others, and well, as you can see below, the video ended up being a bit short. But apart from the short video, you will be quite surprised by this protagonist. He's just a guy who manages to break the cliché, so to find out how he did it, you'll have to watch because our boy is going to crush it, dude. We're going to have some good fights too. For a few minutes, he became almost a Sigma, so let's focus on the video. And here, our protagonist, we can already see him. And there he ends up having for the first time a view until that unique in front of him. Our hero ends up seeing several beautiful young women flying in front of him. But both were using some cultivations in their hands to try to kill a type of superior demon. One of them puts the sword in front, and then the others V in the back to try to defend themselves from something that was approaching. That was the fire of the Kudar, that if caught was dangerous. They tried to dodge, but it was very strong, and one of them ends up being caught by it. She disappears. Her sisters ask everyone to be more careful, as both of them could be caught by this Kudar ball. Soon then, one ends up appearing in front of this one here from our Rochinya, but to avoid being caught, another one appeared. She uses a talisman that helps her escape, but who was also trying to escape was our MC. And while our boy was trying to run away, he is disappointed to see that his first loves of his life ended up going to the better so quickly. But our MC didn't want to know about this fight, because his goal here was always simply to climb the mountains to get some types of medicine to help one of his brothers who ended up getting a type of poisoning, and now there was having trouble escaping. But today, I bring you a work for you from where Yi Fan lives a good life, but ends up being run over by our Trucksama, being sent to another world. He ends up getting that infinite hacker, right? But to understand the story truly, we need to go back a bit. We are introduced to our protagonist. He is Yi Fan, and 3 years ago our protagonist had a car accident. But the reason for having that accident was because Yi Fan decided to work until late. But now he ends up finding himself in a place where in front of him there could be appearing a giant diamond scorpion fighting with a type of strong terrestrial. Both were fighting there to decide who was stronger. The strongest terrestrial ends up launching its tail at the other bee, but that is dodged and hits our protagonist. He ends up kind of realizing that in his life here he was unlucky. In his whole life, he didn't have that luck of getting those hacks that other protagonists get when reincarnating in another life. He doesn't even have a system or a trap there by his side. He was kind of chosen by one of the old men who ended up taking Yi Fan in and giving him a second, almost life. But he and the old man basically have a type of almost similar life. Our protagonist has to live suffering in life to achieve something. It was literally almost like his previous life. But Yi Fan wondered why he didn't get a system by his side, since in other lives he discovered that when reincarnating, you get, I don't know, a good power, but to get the power you need to face danger head-on. But for our protagonist, it was too wrong because here he was, basically attracted to everything that was wrong. And at that moment now, he gave everything he had to try to escape from those monster attacks there. And well, a time traveler should basically have a chance in the future or something to help him. But there, those monsters end up fighting until the end of a cliff. And since Yi Fan was in the middle of that fight without knowing why, he ends up accidentally being thrown off that cliff. Yi Fan falls, and now he sees that maybe this would be his second life he would lose. He was kind of unlucky while falling from that cliff. Yi Fan was already waking up and still wondering if he was in Vio, and there he ended up opening his eyes completely. But after opening his eyes, he ended up finding something. But what our protagonist finds is a mandolin. As soon as he sees this thing, he simply pulls out something that was hidden behind him. This thing he pulled out was a small axe. Then he ends up sort of getting a temporary supply so that he can cure a kind of virus that his brother caught. Soon Yi Fan was about to remove it, but at that moment someone caught his attention from behind. A girl appears calling out to our protagonist, but seeing that a fragrant girl, besides being fragrant, started smelling Yi Fan's ear, he gets startled. He pushes her back, throwing her a little behind, but she smiled a bit at his face. She asks Yi Fan what happened, as the main reason she was there was because he had invaded her house. But changing the subject, She ends up inviting Ye-fan to her nest since he had a rather handsome face. Not for the reason of taking advantage of things there. But well, as soon as our MC realized that she already wanted to hug him, Ye-fan starts commenting that she was also a beauty, but asks why she did these things in the middle of darkness, so not for being there. But she starts to get angry now. She would now show a true form that our protagonist would not like. Her mouth starts to crack, and soon all that beauty turns into this thing here. Our MC, seeing a gigantic mouth in front of him, gets startled. The shock was so great that Ye-fan grabbed the only thing he had in his hand and hit her on the head. She then asks our protagonist if he was used too much for wanting to hit her with that small axe. But she continues to say that even though Ye-fan was human, he was not so inferior to her. She was not as strong as Ye-fan, but she would not let herself be defeated by him. She then ends up opening the last part of her mouth. There she was, eager to drink some things. And our protagonist, appearing at a good moment, she wanted to devour Ye-fan. But Lin-fan soon starts to notice some things. What he noticed was a strange thing behind him. It was something that Ye-fan already recognized. It was the city massacre demon. That was bigger than this monster. He didn't understand. So what appeared starts to devour that monster. It was about to devour our protagonist. It transforms into a kind of light. That monster, which was flying above, said that she could appear soon. She could not be hiding for long. She was willing to destroy the entire forest to search for Ye-fan, who was around. He gets another shock as he now sees that macabre demon attacking everything he had against him. He then realizes that it was over now. Before, he had sort of kicked the bucket because he worked too much. But now he would kick the bucket because he was a coward and weak. But fate did not let Lin kick the bucket here. That monster that was around ends up receiving all the damage from that type of immortal corpse fire. She wonders how this monster finds her, but Ye-fan closes his eyes with a few tears in his eyes. That ends up falling into a ditch, but since he was going to die anyway, not thinking that he might have that new chance of reincarnating into another world. But it was at this moment that you detected that our MC was facing a life-threatening danger, so the system would activate the cultivation of 100 billion for our protagonist. And at this moment, Lin-fan ends up activating the greatest hacker. Seeing a dimension, looking up, he sees something. He then realizes that it only took 3 years, but those 3 years he waited advanced. In front of him appears a little girl. Then this little girl ends up presenting herself as the administrator of his system, and she would be helping our protagonist. The protagonist is wearing the hack robe, but our plotter did not understand who she was. But to explain in a much smarter way to Ye-fan, she shows in front of him a system screen. She explains that our MC has now managed to store 999 million years of cultivation, and he can use all that he wants at any moment. He just needs to unlock it. But well, our MC does not believe that he still had this chance to get that much hack. He asks her to explain again, and she explains. Soon, Ye-fan asks her not to say anything more because now he wanted everything since he now had 999 billion years of cultivation to put into practice. She then understands that Ye-fan will be taking almost everything from her, and for her, almost, it will be good. Then she ends up disappearing because from afar, she will be very eager to observe the development of our Lin-fan. But there, while Lin-fan watched the system disappearing, an unknown girl appears behind. He hears a sound and looks up, but looks up as someone ends up falling on top of him. After seeing someone falling on top of him, he ends up spitting out some blood. But now that she fell on top of him, he saw that the situation was strange, and his body hurt. But looking down, he has a surprise. He realizes that this was that fairy sister from earlier, but now he tries to connect the dots. Maybe what he just saw here in front of him was because of the system. He thinks the system was too fast, but then he asks the fairy sister if she was okay. But suddenly she kind of wakes up. She ends up kind of grabbing something among her special things, and well, she didn't want to die so soon, and she wanted to enjoy as much as possible. This our MC ends up taking quite literally. He understands that she wanted to do other things there, but no. She starts to say that in her hand was a talisman. This talisman needed to be taken to a certain place in a city. It had to be delivered to a certain city lord. But while he was thinking about what our MC would be doing to help her, the talisman in her hand ends up disappearing by a miracle. However, Yifan gets a shock to see the talisman disappearing like an explosion. Soon, that monster ends up appearing from above. Even Chuan comments that she was quite special because he managed to let her escape for almost 3 days and 3 nights, but now it's over. Now she will meet her end here because no one could escape his reach. But then, while he was attacking towards Lin Fan and towards our fairy, we can see our protagonist commenting that this was the guy who used those corpse flames to try to hit our MC earlier, but now it ends up being reused again. That trick almost hits YE Fan, but ends up also dodging that attack, almost hitting the little fairy. But there, our MC looks to the side and sees that the thing he was looking for, which was supposed to help his brother recover, ended up being destroyed by that corpse fire from that monster. But after suffering so much from searching for it and having suffered a lot, he ends up seeing that all of this was quite in vain, and our protagonist did not like it. But while YE Fan is from another place, we see that demon almost dragging her up. She was surrounded by something unknown, but this beast starts to mock her, commenting that a mere old woman would not be able to challenge the guy in front of her. He puts his hand close to her, and now she had no one there to save her, and she would meet her end there. But it was at this moment that YE Fan will show him a bit of his anger. He stands still and extremely irritated with the aqua little stained in hand. But that also ends up catching the attention of that monster. That thing looks at our MC and ends up recognizing that he had the strength of a common immortal. But since he was a common immortal, not of Bai is surprising, only that there soon, by having called our protagonist a type of inferior ant, and also by having kind of destroyed the thing that he so suffered to be looking for, he ends up asking for the system to help him unlock one of those cultivations of almost 1 billion there that our plate had upon activating that. A somewhat eerie aura appears in front of him. He then, upon seeing that eerie aura of Wei Fan, he freezes immediately. He not only freezes, alone, that our elf also freezes, because in that place, a type of aura ends up kind of expanding around this whole place. There a red thing expands to any corner of there that our beautiful simply advances a little backwards, because now a little ago she saw that YE Fan was just a common person, and this has M superior here too. Thought what happened. Lin Fan a little ago was just something that was not worth even looking at, only that now he made this thing here kneel. But our MC asks for this thing to repeat something. There is beautiful, but he no longer cares for the offense that he ended up making to YE Fan. The thing that he cares most was that our elf commented that this guy was making a mess in the world, destroying lives of innocent people. He did not like that. Only that they're approaching him, he asked for him to stop because he recently managed to be opening 3 sources of life. And if this was strong, I don't know, but our MC simply takes that little axe that had hand and puts that with everything in another direction. There, after putting it in that direction, he attacks with all his strength in the face of that monster. The thing ends up losing half of the stub and flying to there. He thought how this was possible. Our protagonist there easily sent that thing up. While our Lin Fan looked at all this happening, we see our elf there with mouth open, watching Wei Fan sending that monster up easily. But the fight is not over yet. Our MC felt that this monster was not defeated easily, and it was not yet. The thing was kneeling there, still bothering our protagonist. He asks for him to stop. And also was not even a person who could be messing with him, because if he sent this superior thing up, the very father of this little thing, here would be trying to find our YE Fan, and there would be the end of Lin Fan. But our hero does not care to go with the launch. Only he ends up splitting that monster in half. There, soon after splitting that in half, an energy begins to arise. Only that energy was so powerful that in front of him there was a mountain. But soon, in the blink of an eye that did not exist anymore, that thing was split in half, and the monster also. And the monster there? Also. The thing falls stiff on the ground, and our MC stays there just observing the whole damage that happened. And who also observes all this was our fairy that was there behind just watching Yifan, because there she did not understand cultivation of our prota. The cultivation that he ended up releasing was a cultivation that gave him a strength, until quite brutal. But upon looking at him, we see him commenting that among the 999 billion years of cultivation, this was the first skill that he used, and for him it was the best. He was extremely happy with that. But the system soon after that appears in his hand. She took a type of Faz that she ends up attacking in the direction of our MC for having kind of used this skill. The physical body of Ye Fan could not be holding. So she ended up kind of taking things from our protagonist soon as she took that. He asks her to explain more about why she did that. There he did not understand, or why only remained just years of life for our protagonist. Well, to understand how this happened, the system of Ye Fan starts to explain. She explains to Lin Fan that he used the skill that took half of his life, only that if he for some reason used more and more of these skills, the system will be taking more and more of his life soon, then disappointed and down. We see our protagonist asking a question to the system that if by chance he ends up dying, the system, I don't know, for some reason will also be dying. But the system in this moment was super chill, because the system was there to help our MC gain power and also take away his power before. Our Ye Fan was only 90-something years old there, but now he is only 6. He still asks for the system to stop messing around or stop betraying him, but there, the system brings the reality. She soon gets scared by our MC's words, but she simply doesn't back down. No, she starts approaching our little guy, and there she begins to thank him for kind of saving her life. Happy to know that he is saving a beauty like this. But this beauty had her life saved by our LM Fan, and kind of offers him this sword. This is a very, very precious sword to her, but she was afraid of dividing it with our protagonist. It was basically the most precious thing to her, but she had no choice but to give everything. But he asks her to keep it. He didn't even have any interest in this sword. She is surprised by herself because all the people she met wanted that sword. But our girl didn't want the sword. No. Our protagonist wanted something more special than a sword. After saying what he wanted, he ends up leaving, and well, he had a weird thought. Everything was wrong with the protagonist. He only asked for a type of medicine, and since she ended up saying she doesn't have the medicine he wants, he asks her to hurry. Otherwise, things would get worse. But before she could leave, she ends up taking a healing potion. That was a kind of thing that could heal anything. This thing in hand ends up grabbing the attention of our hero, who quickly turns to it. He then, all happy, starts running towards it to grab it from our girl. And while he was grabbing it from the hand of our beauty, from another place in the depths, some things are happening in this event. A magical circle ends up kind of being broken. After being broken, it rings a bell. That bell reverberates throughout this place where the people who were there end up understanding the message that was happening. So they needed to meet the emperor as soon as possible because their opponents were still hidden on the mountain. It was very close to them. Right after mentioning this, we can see a guy pointing in another direction saying that someone basically shouldn't allow it to fall into the wrong hands. But as soon as he says this, that thing ends up being evaporated. A ray of power crosses it. And as it is evaporated, from another place, we see the boss of everything saying that he didn't give permission for him to say anything, and moreover, that speech was his. This here is Shu, one of the bosses, and he is powerful. Soon after receiving the news that near the mountain there was a person named Long, who was dragged up, he ended up being furious. But it wasn't with just anyone, because defeating that guy was almost impossible. So his opponent will be worthy of his fight. Now he will have to take revenge on everyone who did this, and he will first go to a certain village close to this place. But like in a city in the morning, we can see him arriving at his house. Now he got what he wanted so much and could be helping one of his brothers to heal. But right after commenting on this, from behind on top, something starts to appear. Soon it calls for our Ye Fan. He who hears these sounds gets scared. But after turning around, he ends up seeing a thing kind of turned into a zombie asking for help. He ends up flying straight towards our hero, but to avoid being caught by this bite, our MC, someone from there, appears. This one who appeared simply kicks the back of his neck, throwing that thing onto the ground. After falling to the ground, we are introduced to this guy who was Chu, but since his uncle has already appeared here, he asks YE to Fan moved away a bit, because he had now completely transformed into a zombie. He was no longer human, and the proof of this was that little mouth that appeared in his mouth. Our protagonist, who saw that there was still a chance to cure him, ended up throwing in his direction something. What he threw was a medication. It went in entirely into his mouth. That poison of Kadar Ven quickly disappeared. Soon, we see an unknown boy who thinks that the last time he was awake, he was bitten by a type of undead corpse, but now he was alive. Now that he thought and saw that he was alive, he started sweating from his eyes. Then he looked in the direction of our hero. He then jumped with all his strength towards Lin Fan. He thanked his brother for this help, but our little guy didn't want anyone's hug. He simply kicked him in his direction, which hit him squarely in the face. He found this a bit ridiculous, but soon as he looked at his brother on the ground, he was surprised because at that moment he could see his attributes, his strength, and everything. Then the system appeared commenting that our protagonist now had a kind of special ability. Now the system allowed our protagonist to look at a person and see their statistics, looking at what cultivation they had. However, if YE Fan didn't want this ability, it was enough to say so, and the little system would be removing it. But YE Fan ended up asking the system why he wanted to remove this. Realizing that he had this ability, he then looked in the direction of the old man. Upon looking, YE Fan began to realize that he was 42 years old, and his cultivation was in the transformation of the realm of gods. This was powerful. Now he even understands how this old man FV was always hiding well, since our MC has this in hand, and the system also doesn't know why it is using this to his advantage. Now he could be dominating the world, but his plan to dominate the world didn't last long, because Zen's wife appeared. Everyone who was walking around there started to observe several muscular guys carrying something. The reason they were carrying this was because Zen's wife was on top of it. She was literally one of the people involved in the slave trade. As soon as our girl saw her, she was surprised to know that she was his wife. But before she could go anywhere, she appeared here again just to deliver to YE Fan some goods. Looking back inside a cage, there were several people inside. Well, our protagonist could choose any of them for himself. He then started to look at each one of them. He began to look at those inside, but his eyes ended up landing on one of them. Then he walked towards her, but as he got closer, he saw that she was not. But upon closer inspection, he realized that this was the blonde girl who caught his attention. So YE Fan extended his hand to this unknown blonde girl. After extending his hand, he began to introduce himself as Lu Fan, and asked her name. Now he asked her to choose to stay aside or continue there. She then introduced herself as Xing, and after repeating her name for the first time, she asked several times for her name and also asked our protagonist not to leave her there. So YE Fan agreed, and he wouldn't be leaving her behind. Even though he chose someone quite young, this was fine. She then introduced one of her mother-in-laws to the old man, but the old man quickly jumped back. He didn't want that. Currently, they always lived hiding from anything, but ignoring their conversation, we can see YE Fan commenting that this Zhongling here, for some reason, had a very special power within her. She, for some reason, had the natural imperial body, which means that she had a rather bright future, and our protagonist considered her a treasure. But while he was commenting on this in the mountains, we could observe something happening. After this thing happened, we observed a monster walking in that direction. It ended up taking a monster that was there idly. Now that it had almost everything it wanted, it would now put its revenge into practice, avenging its son who had passed away. But before he could do this, he activates a skill, this skill there, the bloodline tracking skill. Soon, then it points in a direction. After pointing, we see a macabre smile appearing on his face. Now he ends up sort of asking for the thing that defeated his son to wait, because now this thing there would be devising some sort of nightmare for the life of the person who did that to his son. But in the city's pharmacy, where Ye Fan lives, we see someone calling for our protagonist. This was the one who chose her appeared delivering to our Ye Fan some types of tea. But since if it weren't for the help of our system, he would never have thought that this little innocent girl would be a reincarnation of a Raya who had an extremely strong power, but to be unlocking that power, our protagonist gives a book. To her, this book allows her to evolve more, her hack. Soon, then she grabs that book and asks if she could really be learning that Ye Fan says she could be learning, yes, but it would take, I don't know, 5 or 6 years to be learning, because our protagonist took that kind of time. So then she starts reading. And they're reading. She starts already learning, and she didn't take days or years, anything. Our MC regal eyes and stands open-mouthed there. He couldn't believe that the difference between them was gigantic. She learned things extremely easily. He extremely down. She only saw him head down, but ignoring that already what was happening at the city gate, that Ye Fan lives. A kind of dark cloud starts appearing. People gather there, prepared for something, but one of the extras who was watching this fight that was about to happen points in a direction and says that something in the middle of that cloud appeared, and really appeared, something appeared there, and one of the monsters that were around ends up having its stump cut in half. There someone used some kind of corpse fire skill. Soon then the people who were there to face a certain enemy are surprised by the enemy that appeared. This was a monster that they could not even defeat, because it was the leader of a corpse sect that was around living in this world. But as now they were being invaded, they will have to do everything to stop this thing while they think of doing everything to defend themselves from these monsters. We can see this thing there commenting that the one who killed his son could wait, because now he will be doing the most possible damage he can be doing in this city. While he commented on that, we see our protagonist commenting on this kind of corpse cultivation. Well, this cultivation was basically giving up everything and only dedicating basically one thing. Soon below the system appears again to be annoying, saying that our protagonist only has 999 billion cultivation to be used, but however, he only has a few years of life. Well, while the system keeps being annoying from another place, we can see the monsters attacking the city. People were in chaos, screaming. We see that monster, the leader of the sect there in the background, just laughing, asking for the one who defeated his son to appear there soon as possible. And at the moment that was happening, the pharmacy where our protagonist was, we can observe a mansion inside that mansion. We can see our little blonde girl who was in a bed. She was cultivating. But while cultivating, we can see our MC commenting on that monster that appeared now near the city. Our protagonist could until manage to face that in a 1v1. But he ended up remembering that last time he used that cultivation skill of 900 billion there, he ended up losing half of his life, but our protagonist found a method for him to be using those 900 billion cultivation, but if he used it an actor there, his body would lose basically years of life, so he didn't want to. So he tries something else. But he is surprised by something that started happening in front of him appeared. I don't know. Some weird things for some reason. Our protagonist managed to see a city extremely far away there, so he ends up half by managing to put that close to his eyes. Now our protagonist managed to see a place where he might never reach in his life with these eyes. Our MC can see even the end of the world. And be right. While he commented on this, not because Tess look at this on our blondie, then he turns to her, but as soon as he turns, he ends up having a surprise. Because that also ends up seeing the real will of the person, and that ended up seeing things that left our protagonist very surprised. The kid flies backward, blood comes out of his nose. The reason was that he saw a surprising thing there, where the FBI was part of it. She who saw our protagonist flying backward with his nose bleeding asks the reason for this. Well, our protagonist comments to her that it was nothing too much, not lymph, like that. Then starts to turn to her back here. He wanted to do a cultivation to be helping her evolve, but there, our protagonist was still using the eye, and there were some things that Ye Fan could be doing with her, but needed to be concentrating, but it was useless. Her thought was bigger, only that while we had those bizarre thoughts from there, we can observe at the city gate our own live. Many things happening, but among these things that were happening, there was people running to and fro. Monsters were increasingly invading the city. The people who were around there had no more escape to be running. A beast with a giant look appears and was going to be attacking a main point. But appears one of the guards there. He was the leader of the guard here, then ends up asking for this to retreat. But as he did not want, he ends up using a phoenix cultivation. With that cultivation, our guard leader can easily throw that in its direction, but was not easily defeated for that train. There swallowed that phoenix, so he could not be caught along with that. There he ends up jumping up. But here jumping, he wonders how it was possible for something like that to be captured and destroyed easily, but he would not give up. He then activates again, that his feign. But soon, while he was there, trying to defend himself from behind, appears that little beast Faye there, that was now closer than ever to that city that he wanted to invade. But soon, now that this latter of the guards there noticed his presence, he then ends up sort of crouching now there under, we see him asking for this to go, to start the party, because now everything here will be starting at its good moment. But you know, man, this we will really be discovering literally only in a next part.